Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to another exclusive genetic webinar, and I'm very happy to be introducing Kori Kostka, who is a registered dietitian with the West Durham Family Health Team. Health at every size is an alternative paradigm to the traditional weight-focused approach. Today, we will be joining Kori as she discusses her experience using the non-weight-based paradigm to help individuals build a positive body image, enjoy food, and discover the pleasure of moving their body to attain a sustainable, life-affirming, and health-providing income. In addition to her work with West Durham Family Health Team, Kori also has her own business called Core Nutrition, where she makes evidence-based nutrition easily accessible. Kori is also the previous vice chair for the Dietitians of Canada, Ontario Family Health Team Registered Dietitian Network, and the secretary for the Association for Size, Diversity, and Health. She's currently part of the Central East Local Health Integration Network's Health Professionals Advisory Committee. So if anyone has any issues with audio or viewing the slides, please let us know in the chat box. We'll be sure to get a copy of the webinar to all those who have registered just in case we cannot alleviate any of those problems. As well, if you do have any questions, be sure to type it in the chat box located at the bottom right corner of the screen. I know some of you guys have already found it. And we'll try to go through them, but just to let you guys know, we will be holding a 5 to 10 minute question period towards the end of the webinar. So we'll try to get through any questions then. So now I will hand the mic over to Kori. Kori, once again, thank you for being here with us.
Great. Thank you, Julissa, for having me. And also a thank you to Medic for hosting and having me present. I also wanted to thank all of the listeners that are joining. I've never had so many people want to spend their lunch hour with me. So I do appreciate you spending that time with me. So we'll get started. The topic for today is health at every size, a non-weight-based approach to healthier lifestyle. And I just wanted to share some of my own personal experiences on how I present this with my patients in the setting that I work with at the West Durham Family Health Team. So today I just wanted to define what health at every size is and explain the background on where that came from. A lot of questions that were submitted were asking about some of the challenges of health at every size, whether it is in public health, personally, or in a primary care setting, which is where I work. I'm also going to share with you some of the tools I use for influencing lifestyle behaviors and just share a little case study that I had experience with a patient at our family health team. And then hopefully we have some time for questions at the end. I'm going to skip defining why it's important to use this approach, because by the sounds of the questions that were being asked, I think most people just want an alternative approach. If anybody has any specific questions about some research at the end, please feel free to ask those questions. I just wanted to give you a background on what a family health team is, because you'll hear me say family health team. I work for a family health team in Pickering, which consists of 12 family doctors, nurse practitioners, registered dietitians. We have 2 social workers, myself, and we now have a pharmacist. Other family health teams might have other healthcare professionals, such as an occupational therapist. In Ontario, there's over 200 family health teams, and the purpose is really to try and advance the healthcare services for people, and 2.9 million Ontarians are currently being served by family health teams. And I'm excited to work for a family health team because part of the primary objective is really to focus on disease management, disease prevention, and health promotion. And that's why I think it's a perfect place for health at every size to be implemented. So just last week, we had 26 medical residents doing an education day at our family health team, and I asked them this question: is body size is not an accurate indication of health, true or false? I was happy to see that most of us and most of the students in the room answered, well, that depends on the extremes. So I asked them to define what those extremes are, and they pretty much listed all the lifestyle behaviors. Do they smoke? Do they drink? Do they eat quality foods? Are they active? What's their stress levels? And what's their relationship with food? So I'm guessing that's good news, that something is changing, because to ask those questions and see what is going on aside from just the patient weight. Kathy in Vancouver had submitted a question about the reluctance from health professionals to accept a HAES approach, especially in the morbidly obese individual, and asking my response to that. So Kathy, this was actually a question that our family health team asked myself, and we just went through some of the data on what defines what a person is considered healthy. And so some of the research behind that actually shows that there is such thing as a healthy obese person. And when you compare that to the skinny person who has all those unhealthy behaviors, that skinny person can have a higher risk factor than the obese person who actually has lots of healthy lifestyle behaviors. So the research is out there. I didn't include those slides in this presentation because I figured most people were already there in terms of that information, but I'd be happy to share you some of that research, and I did provide my email at the end, so you can email me about that. Lynn in Hamilton asked a similar question about the resistance, and I'm going to share with you some of the motivational interviewing resources that I use. And basically what I have learned from teaching Choices and Changes, which is a program that's run within our LIN, which is the Local Health Integrated Network in our area, is that you kind of have to roll with resistance and understand where the person is coming from and what their experience has been. Because from working with the doctors that I have at our family health team, there was some resistance, and it really just was because they didn't understand or they had their own experience. And we always remember the outliers. So I just kind of went through them what the research was, what their experience was, and kind of took a man-down approach rather than trying to force them into an approach that they didn't really see the value in. And something that I've learned from doing Choices and Changes also is that you sort of have to match the importance first before you start increasing a person's confidence in using this approach. So I've done lots of work with our team on understanding what they define as healthy, what their experience is with assessing weight with their patients, and how they've had experience with patients losing weight or through dieting, and sort of justifying those experiences that really they aren't working. So what can we do differently? So this is just the start of a defining health at every size. For those of you who aren't aware, ASDA, which is the Association for Size, Diversity, and Health, hosts the trademark for this acronym for Health at Every Size. And it doesn't mean that you can't use this. We actually named one of our programs at our family health team Health at Every Size. It's just to make sure that you're following the principles and using this the way it was designed to protect the meaning behind health at every size. The good news is that it is an evidence-based paradigm, and I will show you a little bit of the evidence summarized in a slide later. But it's really just focusing on being weight neutral, and there's a lot of misconceptions about what that means, and so I just want to kind of go over how you can sort of overcome some of those misconceptions, because I've certainly encountered a lot of those myself. It's helping to create peace and not war. And a lot of the times I say to my patients, you did not fail the diet failed you, or the behavior failed you. And it becomes a vicious cycle, because when people start blaming themselves, that inner war starts happening. And one of the lines that I hear one of our social workers says, the insides don't match the outside. Somebody can look like from the outside they've got everything together, but on the inside it's always an internal struggle. And we certainly see that with a lot of people who have an eating disorder or disordered eating. The other principle, one of the meanings behind health at every size, is to focus on care, not punishment. And I have a slide later on about how exercise can be used sometimes as a punishment for eating And so it's about learning how to take care of the body and not punish it. Respect, not shame. So here's where the self-talk can be very negative, and people start calling themselves or putting themselves down. And so it's just helping people to learn respect where they're at as well as their body. Using evidence, not assumptions. So here's where we can look at somebody and judge what we think means health and if they're healthy based on what they look like. And I've had people share with me that they think this could also be applied in other aspects of life, using all of these principles with health at every size. So it's amazing how much changing our focus on food and our weight can also impact other areas, whether it's our work life, our personal life, our relationships. So these are the actual principles that the Association for Size, Diversity, and Health are currently reviewing. And so when you go on to ASDA's website, which is sizediversityandhealth.org, you'll see that these are the HAES principles. And I'll go through these in more detail, but this is really just showing that we're kind of trying to respect where the body is at and where the body will land in terms of its natural set point, and I'll define that a little bit more. So knowing that there are always going to be all different sizes and shapes of our body. Something that's becoming more popular in health promotion that I've noticed in Toronto is this whole health in all policies. And number 2 really helps apply health in all policies beautifully. And I think a lot of the questions that came around health promotion and public policy is really that's what we're trying to do, and not just focus on nutrition, not just focus on mental health, but trying to collaborate all of those things together so that we're really defining health not as just the absence of disease, but we're making sure that people have the right physical, social, spiritual, occupational, emotional, and intellectual aspects of health included. Eating healthy includes balancing your nutrition needs, your hunger, your satiety, appetite, and pleasure. It's not just about calories in and calories out, it's actually asking the person, what do you like, what do you not like? And most of us don't eat for reasons just for hunger. We eat for many other reasons, and it's identifying what is that true hunger. And being able to enjoy our food so that we can turn off those signals and not feel so restricted. Number 4 is choosing activity that's appropriate and enjoyable and life-enhancing rather than just for weight loss. We're seeing more now that the research is showing that physical activity doesn't really do much for weight loss, but it does many other things, especially with depression or helping with our blood pressure management or blood sugar levels. So it's trying to shift the focus again from just on weight loss and looking at all the other health impacts that these things have. This is just a slide from the new HAES curriculum, which was developed by the Society for Nutrition, Education, and Behavior, as well as NAFA, which is the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance, and ASDA. And I love this slide because it really just helps to highlight how things are different from a diet paradigm, which is on the left-hand side there. So in a diet paradigm, the goal is really focused on a weight or a number. And a lot of the times in our clinic, we try to sort of help people understand that weight's not really a goal, it's an outcome. Goals are action-oriented. And it would be nice if we could just say, I want to lose X amount of weight, but you need an action associated there. So in the non-diet approach, we try and encourage that the body will go to its natural set point if we let it, if we help people to re-establish their hunger and their first cues. And that can take work in itself because there's a lot of things that influence there. Again, the focus is shifted towards the behaviors to allow the body to heal and go back to where it's meant to be. In the diet approach, food becomes then listed as good, bad, should and shouldn't have, legal, illegal. And I always say to people that nobody likes to be should on because nobody likes to be told what to do, if you heard me correctly when I said that word. And it's looking at not the quality and the quantity, and again, that can be governed by external resources or diets, telling us what we can have, what we can't have, how many calories, what food labels are appropriate, what exchanges are appropriate. So in a non-diet approach, we say that all food is accepted. And this again has its own challenges because some people assume, well, then I can go and eat anything. Yes, you can. However, we want to also match that with what quantity and quality is right for you. Can you listen and respect your internal cues that say, this combination of food makes me feel good, this combination, however, kind of makes me feel blah. And is that how I want to feel? So the person then becomes empowered in their choices and learns that when they eat a certain way, they get a certain feeling or a certain result out of it. So they can decide which outcome do they want to have. So again, it's responding to their own physical cues, which are internal, rather than listening to the external cues. The last one there is the physical activity, which we already mentioned. Exercise to lose weight is usually why lots of people in January sign up for the gym. And I've noticed that at my gym, it gets very, very busy in January, and then come March, it kind of goes back to you can get whatever machine you want again, because a lot of people drop out. And the pattern I've noticed there is obviously when people start stepping on the scale, they don't see the change on the scale from doing all this exercise, they don't see the value, so then they drop out. Physical activity in a non-diet approach is trying to make sure that it's something that increases your sleeping patterns, improving the way you feel, and it's something fun and interactive that you can do with your family or your friends or on your own, but picking something that you enjoy doing. And I see this a lot with people trying to start up running because they know it's the best exercise they can do, yet they absolutely hate doing it. And so it's kind of having that conversation. Isn't that interesting? You want to try running, although you already know you don't enjoy it. What do you think is going to keep you running? So it's a lot of the motivational interviewing that I use with people and just letting them hear it out loud so that they can say to me, you know what, you're right, that's probably not going to last. This is just a summary of some of the evidence around using a health at every size approach compared to a diet approach, which was the control group. So Linda Bacon and Lucy Affermore summarizes this in one of their articles, and the nice thing is that we do see an improvement in people's eating behaviors, meaning they start choosing more quality foods, they start listening to their internal cues and letting them guide themselves. Intuitive eating also improves, and I'll define intuitive eating a little bit later also, which means basically that they're just listening more to those internal cues rather than the external. We see an improvement in disordered eating attitudes, and we also see people's blood work improve. So their LDL cholesterol, their lousy cholesterol, starts decreasing. We see their blood pressure improve. We see that physical activity can increase by fourfold. Binge eating is lowered, self-esteem improved, depression is also managed, body dissatisfaction, body image, and again, that body awareness all improve. So just another approach to show you that there is some evidence here. We're seeing more and more of it now as people are becoming aware of health at every size. And a lot of the times we're already using these principles and we don't even know this is actually following the health at every size paradigm. So it's just making sure and checking in that there is research behind what you're doing. This is something that Linda Bacon actually has on her website that you can download. And I love it. It's actually how I start off all of our Health at Every Size programs in the office. And really what it's doing is it's encouraging people to give themselves permission to experiment and knowing that it's okay to do it this way. And they actually sign off on this at the beginning of the program. So today I will try to feed myself when I'm hungry. Notice how it says try, because it's giving people permission to see what will happen if they try to feed themselves and listen to when they're actually hungry. They may not get it the first time, so it's trying to give them some experience to build upon and use them as learning opportunities rather than another session they can just guilt themselves or beat themselves up for something when it doesn't work. Today I will try to be attentive to how foods taste and make me feel good, and looking for which ones don't. I will try to choose foods that I like and that make me feel good. So lots of I and me statements. I will try to honor my body's signals of fullness. I will try to find an enjoyable way to move my body. Today I will look kindly at my body and to treat it with love and respect. They're not easy things for everyone to do, and that's why we are encouraging people to experiment with them. And of course, it does take time to sort of build on these experiences and to re-listen. Not everyone is intuitive 100% of the time. And again, an intuitive person uses those experiences as a learning opportunity rather than punishing themselves. So anytime a patient comes in and they're down about, well, I tried and it didn't really turn out, we talk about it. Okay, well, let's see what happened there and see if next time maybe you can try something different. Because clearly the way you did it before didn't work, and that's okay. And letting them know it's okay that things don't work always. So this is just starting to get into how to explain what's going on in our society. And Linda Bacon, I don't know what happened to the reference there, but this is a summary from Linda Bacon's book, Health at Every Size, The Surprising Truth About Your Weight. And she has a little section there with a theory about what's happened with our ancestors. So even just 100 or 150 years ago, our ancestors were hunter-gatherers. And during periods of time when food was available, insulin is what made it possible for us to store, for our ancestors, to store extra energy. Because insulin's primary job is to manage our blood sugar, but once the cells are happy with the quantity of glucose, then insulin's secondary job is to store as fat. During periods of famine, people survived because of the stored body fat. And a lot of people refer this to survival of the fittest, but I kind of think of it was the survival of the fattest. It was really the people who stored efficiently who then went on to have babies, and now in our generation we're seeing people that are having these insulin issues, and it could possibly be related to the fact that our insulin levels from our ancestors are what helped them to survive. So in today's society, we're releasing way too much insulin, not everybody, but some people I see this ongoing, and that increases the risk of fat storage, which can then turn on diabetes. So here's the chicken and the egg conversation. What came first? Was it the insulin resistance or the weight? And how did that interact with diabetes? So again, we talk a lot in the office about looking at people's insulin resistance and seeing if that's influencing, rather than just looking at their weight and saying you need to lose weight so that you don't develop diabetes, especially in our pre-diabetes class. So here we're just kind of poking fun at our evolution. And of course, maybe it is about going back and seeing if we can do things a little bit differently. Or can we learn from what's going on right now and move forward instead? I mentioned Setpoint theory a little bit earlier. And this is something I introduce in our classes or when I'm seeing somebody individually. And I ask people, have you heard of this? And a lot of people say no. And I just ask them, what do you think it means? And a lot of the times they get it right. And sometimes they're questioning, well, how does that work? And is that possible? But basically, your set point is the weight that your body wants to be at. Not your mind, but your body as an entirety. Where it feels it can maintain itself to be healthy. And there's lots of evidence showing that 50 to 80% of our genetics is what helps to set the set point. And we can throw it off, but we can also encourage it to work by following our intuitive cues. Dieting, however, takes control from our body's weight regulation system, and it messes it up because it tries then to set it a little bit higher in order to protect itself. The body works very, very hard to keep it at that weight. So each time a person goes on a diet or loses weight, that's why sometimes we hear, I lost 20, but I regained 30. And it could be related to this whole set point in the body protecting itself. And here's a picture of what happens, and sometimes I show this to patients, especially those who are chronic dieters, and I say, can you relate to this? And usually most people will nod. And, to make it fair with gender, I really need to have both images for male and female because I certainly see that pattern for both. These are questions, again, summarized from Linda Bacon's book, so you can find those in her book. And I just ask people these questions when they're coming to see me. Do you find it hard recognizing you're hungry and when you're full? It's surprising how many people kind of stop and think, I don't think I ever see if I'm hungry or I'm full before I start eating something. Do you regularly feel uncomfortably full, lethargic, and stuffed after meals? Do you sometimes eat everything in sight in preparation for your next diet? Do you skip meals thinking it will help you to lose weight when you overeat because you're too hungry? And there's a few more there. So sometimes people are either above or below their set point because of how they answer to these questions. And just a few more here. Do you feel guilty about some of the foods or amounts of foods you eat? And it's overwhelming how many people respond yes to this question, and they're living with this guilt day in and day out. And then the guilt can also lead them to what Michelle calls the eat, repent, repeat cycle. And then, of course, the behavior just keeps on going, repeating, and the guilt can build. If you overeat, do you think you've blown your diet and end up eating more? So again, just some questions and tools for those of you who are asking me that I sort of start off the assessment with somebody and just seeing where they're at. And when I ask these questions in class, usually you get lots of head nods or you get the face going, I wonder if I do that. So it's just a way to open it up and get the conversation started. So if people answer yes to those questions, I try to encourage them not to feel guilty about that either. We want to use that as a learning opportunity to see if we can get them back to their set point or to see if they're already at their set point. I try and encourage them that I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what weight that we will get them to, but let's see if you're throwing things off. So relearning to trust your body can either be those intuitive cues or cravings or things that our body is asking us for. Are we able to listen, and how do we respond to those cues? The intuitive cue, the best way I understand this is we're all born with them. As babies, when we're hungry, we usually cry, or our caregiver is an expert usually at knowing what our hunger cue is. And the way we are satiated is we're usually fed with, whether it's a breast or a bottle, until we're full. Even from a young age, and I see my own friends and family sometimes doing this, if there's a tiny little bit left on the plate or a little bit left in the bottle, we try and make sure that the baby fills up. So we can sort of learn from a young age how to ignore our own hunger and fullness cues based on what's in our environment. Accepting the weight you maintain when you do and not to focus on food and weight is usually a really hard one for people to accept. And what it's really, the meaning behind it is it's learning to love who you are, because you are not what changes when your behaviors change. It's the behavior that changes. And the result you get and the outcome is you're empowered in your choices that you make. So it's trying to get people to see that your body may change or it may not, but you as a person, there's nothing about you that needs to change in this process. It's finding a better matched behavior and allowing your body to return to the weight that it wants to be at. So the BMI, lots of people ask questions because this is something that's commonly used in our medical system, whether it's a doctor, a dietitian, or a weight loss center, or a gym. Lots of people are using BMI, but they're not using it in the way it was designed. So this is an example of what's not our set point. For some people, it might be these categories, especially around the healthy category, a BMI of 18.5 to 24.9. But not every healthy person is going to fall in this category. I've seen some people fall below, and then of course I get the referral for a query eating disorder. Yet when I screen their behaviors, they're actually quite healthy and they're maintaining their weight. So it's trying not to put a label. It's trying to use what the BMI was designed for, which is a risk stratification tool. It was not designed to be used solely. It was designed to be used in conjunction with also asking questions about people's behaviors. So we can get a better understanding of whether these people are healthy or unhealthy. So I try not to use these categories with the names they're healthy, overweight, obese. I've sort of drop those labels altogether. And in the clinic, we also try and encourage our staff to sort of look beyond just those categories. The downside to BMI also is that it doesn't really estimate body fat percentage. It estimates total body mass. So we have seen people who fall in these categories, but their body fat percentages vary. And it's very expensive to get a good tool to measure body fat percentage, especially in a primary care setting. So again, it's a tool, it's not a weight goal. And a lot of people that I see are using BMI as a goal weight. And it's a scary thing because not everybody is going to fall in these categories. The other thing about weight and obesity related to cancer, heart disease, stroke, and diabetes is we only have correlation studies, which means that there's a connection between the two, but they're not causality studies, meaning that one is not responsible for the other. So we have to be careful how we're interpreting this data and how the media is then sharing this data, because most of these studies are not cause and effect. They're only relationship. So this is just a summary that there's also insurance companies that have influenced the way the body mass index was established. And just because somebody's a normal BMI does not mean they're healthy. They can smoke, drink, eat low quality foods, and have a higher risk than the obese person who exercises regularly, eats good quality foods, is sleeping well, manages their stress levels, and so on. So again, we're just trying to look past the numbers and see what those behaviors really define. The other thing, in 1998, there was a task force, the International Obesity Task Force. They actually lowered the guidelines or the levels for BMI, meaning that some people went to bed overweight and woke up obese overnight. And these guidelines were not changed based on any science. They were actually just based on the recommendations from this task force. And if you look at who was sitting on that task force, there are pharmaceutical companies who sell weight loss drugs. So we kind of question the science behind the BMI categories, and that's why it's just trying to look past those numbers. I mentioned intuitive eating. So intuitive eaters are really those who respond to their internal cues more often, listening to their body. And we actually see from the research that people who do have higher self-esteem, can cope better, have greater optimism, better satisfaction overall with their life, and they tend to have a natural lower body mass index. And I think the point there is really that it's maintained. It's not yo-yoing, and they have less body dissatisfaction. So the question is, what is intuitive eating and how do we get there? So defining intuitive eating, it's more than just not having disordered eating habits or eating disorders. It's not about dropping the calorie restriction and the dieting and the counting. It's about the body knowledge and getting back to those internal cues that we were all born with. So listening to our internal hunger and actually responding to an emotional hunger through other means if food does not satisfy that. And stopping when we're comfortable. Maybe not full, but comfortable. And I have a tool that I use to help people do this that I'll share with you. It's about looking at what foods respond to our moods and which foods might trigger our moods changing, especially our energy levels. Some people find that certain combinations of food either maintain or take away from their energy. And sometimes too, when people respond to these cues, they also notice other parts of their body working better in terms of bowel movements. And I mentioned earlier that emotional eating, it's finding a way to better manage this. We're all emotional eaters. We respond to our food with emotions in terms of how it makes us feel or what foods we want to have. So we're not trying to eliminate emotional eating. We're just making sure that it's not the only coping mechanism that people have. And of course, my favorite part about all this is it's teaching or relearning to love your food. A lot of people come to me saying, I love food so much, that's my problem. And so I question them about, well, how do you love your food? And we explore, how do they love someone or something? Do they rush through it? Do they just come in and sort of drop their bags and then run back out again? Do they spend time? Do they ask questions. And a lot of people can see the relationship, how that would work with their food. If I'm rushing my food or eating while I'm working or while I'm watching TV, I don't really get the full satisfaction from that experience. And so we do some exercises around mindful eating and how we can actually appreciate and love our food. My best example of this is a patient who did this experiment with sour cream and onion chips because that was something she really, really loved. And she used to go home, and every Tuesday and Thursday her family would all sit together and watch their favorite program. And so it became a treat and a behavior associated. So her experiment was she started pouring the chips into a bowl because she kind of had some eating amnesia where she'd get to the end of the bag and wonder who ate all of her chips. And she'd have her bowl of chips in front of the TV, and then her next experiment was to go into the kitchen during the commercial break and eat her bowl of chips. And after a few experiments, she ended up coming back to me saying, I don't even like them. They don't even taste good. But when we're distracted and really it's looking at what she really wanted was the family time, she was able to better meet her needs. So sometimes it's about doing these experiments and getting people to reconnect with what their body's really asking them for. So something I use a lot of is Evelyn Tribole and Elise Rush's principles to intuitive eating. And I actually have a printout of this, and you can get it from their website if you Google them, some of the worksheets that they use. But usually I start off with an intuitive eating assessment. So whether it's the questions I shared with you from Linda Bacon, or there is an intuitive eating assessment that Evelyn Tribole uses that I use in the office as well. And it's going through these principles with people. I won't spend too much time here because you can see that it would take quite a while to go through all of these. But we just talk about the diet mentality and how successful the diet industry is and why people think the diet industry is so successful. So to give you some examples of how I have this conversation is I ask people, do you know how much in the US alone last year the diet industry made? And so I'll give you a moment to think about that. And the newest level is about $65 billion just in the US alone that the diet industry made, which is up from previous years when it was $61.5 billion. So we see these numbers are increasing, but are we seeing the issues going away? And usually most people answer no. Usually the problem is getting worse. So we kind of wonder, is dieting part of that problem? And we're seeing some correlations there that dieting could be influencing people's set points. So we just talk about it and see if people can put those pieces together. I try not to give the answers because I want people to be empowered in those answers themselves. And when they see it, that's when they're usually more successful in changing their behaviors. Honoring your hunger, we've talked about already, and it's listening to when people are actually hungry. Sometimes I see people, though, who only eat once or twice a day, and their body is used to that. So sometimes it's relearning and getting people to eat more frequently so that those hunger cues can come back. So it really depends on where people are at. Make peace with food is one of my favorites because a lot of times we label foods. This is good food, this is bad food, I should eat this, I shouldn't eat that. And it can take away from the experience. And sometimes you see people who go and eat in isolation because they're afraid of being judged for eating these bad foods, or they want to show off their grocery carts in the grocery store because of all the good foods inside of it. And so it's trying to take those labels away and just getting people to understand what foods make them feel good and which foods do not, rather than labeling them from an external source that this is good and this is bad. And this is something that healthcare does a lot of because we usually give people lists of foods that are healthy for their cholesterol and foods that are not, or foods that will help to lower their blood sugar and foods that will not. So it's just kind of asking people, what do you think? Which foods are going to help to do that, rather than answering the question for them. Challenging the food police inside is when people label themselves good and bad. Oh, I was so good today, I ate this for lunch and this for dinner, or oh man, I really blew it when I got home, I was so hungry, I just inhaled everything. So it's trying to get people to take the pressure off themselves and see what led you to do that behavior. Did it give you the outcome you were looking for? And if not, do you think there's something different you could do next time to get a different result? or the result that you're really looking for. We've talked about respecting fullness, and I'll show you later the hunger and fullness cues and the worksheet that I use with people. And usually I use sushi as an example for number 6. And I ask people if they like sushi first, because if not, then I don't use this example. But most people that like sushi, I ask them, what do you notice about when the sushi comes out on the platter? And they'll say, oh, it's presented very beautifully. There's lots of color, lots of different texture. And that's how the Japanese eat. They eat the foods that they really want. They make them look appetizing. They sit down, they enjoy, and then their body can respond and tell them naturally and instinctively, okay, I think I'm comfortably full. Rather than trying to be mindful 24/7, then that becomes obsessive. It's trying to allow it to happen naturally, which can take practice, but eventually we want people just to do this intuitively, where they're not thinking about it all the time. It's amazing how many people think about food 24/7, which sometimes it can be helpful, but sometimes it can be obsessive and compulsive. So we're trying to take that away and get it to a place that it doesn't take over other aspects of their life. So it's asking about those things too. Honoring your feelings without using food, I'll talk a little bit about this. Respecting your body, again, this can take lots of practice, and sometimes we have a social worker on board who helps out with this part in terms of the body image. So it's knowing your resources and knowing who to refer to and being able to get that information from the person in front of you. I'll talk a little bit about intuitive exercise. And the last principle here, which I really, really love, is making food choices that honor your health and your taste buds while making you feel well. So that's the last principle from intuitive eating. And I really love that line because it's just summarizing what intuitive eating is and trying to get the person to get that place on their own. So exercising is for health and vitality, not for earning the right to eat. And this is a quote from Michelle Mann. So how do we make intuitive exercise? Again, this is a slide from the HAES curriculum. I think the reference got dropped off there. But like our eating, how there can be external sources telling us what we should and shouldn't do, a lot of people get a lot of information about exercise and physical activity. So physical activity is really just movement, and it can be anything from taking the stairs to walking to your car. And exercise is usually something more structured, like going for a walk with a friend or playing volleyball. And the research shows us that people who are externally motivated, usually it gets them to start the exercise because there's a motivation, whether it's rewards or money from their gym. Right now I see there's a $1,000 reward at my gym for people making changes and losing weight. But usually the rewards don't encourage people to maintain that behavior in the long term. So what is important is to try and find the intrinsic motivator, the internal reward, and what's the point of doing that exercise. And I think about a patient of mine who, at the end of his workday, he used to reward himself by going and grabbing a hamburger on the way home. But then he'd get home and he'd feel full and he'd want to eat dinner with his family members, so he would eat dinner too and feel totally uncomfortable after the meal. So he had asked me, what's going on there? What can I do differently to reward myself? And I kind of stopped and looked at him and I think you just answered your own question. And he kind of looked at what he had just said and he could see the connection with, he was just looking for a reward at the end of the day for all of his hard work. So he went away and experimented and he ended up finding biking was his new reward. And now he's actually a triathlete. Not expecting everybody to go and do that. However, he found the connection that he was just looking for a reward. So something that enhanced his mood, it decreased his stress level, it gave him some enjoyment, and he noticed too he was sleeping better. So those are those internal motivators that usually help keep people continuing that behavior. So asking people, what are some things that physical activity or exercise do for you? And rather than being prescriptive, we do know there's lots of research showing us the improvements of health when people exercise. But if we prescribe exercise like a medication, people aren't going to do it long term. that again becomes an external control. So it's asking the person, what do you notice improves? Or what would you expect to improve? So that we can give them another measure of success. Instead of focusing on what and how much food you should eat, the key first is understanding why you want to eat in the first place. This is awareness. It will give you an opportunity to meet your true needs appropriately. And this is just a quote from Michelle May's book, Eat What You Love, What You Eat. So how we get people to look at hunger fullness, this is a tool that's created in our office. And if you notice, the orange areas are labeled awareness areas. I've seen this labeled elsewhere as problem area. And I try and shift away from those negative words because we want people to learn in these areas and not look at them as bad things. And so if people are absolutely starving by the time they get to dinner, it's looking back, well, what do you think happened? And sometimes I see this pattern where people don't eat enough all day long and they're so hungry by the time they get home. So I ask that, do you think because you haven't had much to eat at this meal or throughout the day has any impact on how you feel later on in the day? I already know the answer. However, me knowing is not enough. It's getting the person in front of me to know and understand what's working, what's not working. Similarly, with the other awareness area where people are feeling discomforted or overfull, it's looking at what led them to get there. So that on average, we can keep them in the green areas, eating when they're hungry and stopping when they feel comfortably full. I actually have a whole worksheet on this too. So again, anybody who's looking for some of these worksheets, you can email me for the ones that aren't available to download online. This one is available online. This is from the Eating Mindfully website, and we use this in conjunction in our Health at Every Size class with the Hunger and Fullness, as well as looking at the quality of food choices to get people to look at their plate a little bit differently and not just prescriptively. Eat this, don't eat that. Being aware of how their food tastes, being able to savor it, looking at their internal hunger fullness. Are they eating when their energy is low, and is that helping? Are they eating when they're stressed? Being in the moment and just trying to eliminate or decrease distractions if it's not possible to eliminate. And trying to be non-judgmental and be gentle on themselves and look for those rules. It's amazing to hear the diet chatter come out of people when they're in my office chatting with me or to other people. I notice this in my own personal life when people are at the restaurant and they're looking at what I'm about to order and trying to ask me what's the best choice on the menu. And so it's just looking at it, well, what is it that you feel for? And how hungry are you? And how much do you really need in this scenario to feel satisfied? I won't deny that quality of food choices aren't important. Most people know what's healthy and what's not healthy. What they're lacking, though, is the skill and how to maintain that information. So sometimes I explain this to people by using this diagram in our classes, is that food could probably be classified as kind of the quick digesting or the lower quality food, similarly to how we fill the gas tank of our car. There might be foods sort of in the middle that are maybe a little bit more processed but not as processed. And then there are foods that are the least processed in their whole state. And so we have options. We don't have to eat only from one category because, again, that can be more obsessive. But some people, that's what they function on and they work well and they're not thinking about it all the time. So it's about making choices from these different categories and seeing which combinations actually help to give us the outcome we're looking for. So this is how I do the quality piece. Nutrition in our classes is getting people to experiment with different qualities of foods and seeing which ones are the most appetizing and fulfilling for them. A lot of people talk about control. If I had better control or more willpower, I'd be able to maintain these choices. Well, if you look at some of the motivational interviewing research, we see that willpower is not the reason why people aren't able to sustain the changes. There's lots of other reasons. And so it's trying to get people away from control, because when you're trying to look for it, it eventually takes control of you. And one of the best lines that I hear in practice is, in order to be in control, you have to let go of control. And that can be a very hard thing for people to do. So it's about helping people to get there. Stress, whether it's positive or negative, can really have an impact on how people manage their healthy lifestyle. So I do talk about stress with people, and Gabor Mate or Dr. Michael Evans in his video, The Best Thing You Can Do to Manage Your Stress, they quote that 75% of the visits to a primary health care provider are usually stress related. So here again is where health and all policies can really help. It's not just about talking nutrition, it's also about how do people cope, how do people manage their stress levels, and can we make programs that are inclusive to all of these aspects of health rather than just working in our silos. What we have found in our classes is that there's lots of changes and lots of reasons why people's weight are impacted. And so it's looking at what are those challenges, and this is just a gradient showing that if people are struggling to maintain their natural set point, what are those influences? So this research is actually coming from the Adverse Childhood Experience, the ACE study. So for those of you who are interested, you can look up the ACE study. And we're seeing that a lot of people who have coped or who have numbed with their food choices or their behavior choices, sometimes there's unfinished business. And again, we might need to call in some extra resources to be able to better manage these things. So again, we use these kind of to understand where their thoughts come from about themselves, and we use a blackboard analogy in our office to try and get people to sort of understand how they label themselves, where those experiences came from. And rather than trying to spend so much time erasing, we ask people to rewrite a new meaning beside. And so that's why the blackboard can be helpful for people to visualize. A lot of people that we see don't want to think, don't want to talk, and don't want to feel. And that's where the substances can come in to be used as numbing or coping mechanisms. So sometimes we have to talk about, well, what's going to help you? What are you doing now that's helping you, and what are you doing that's kind of holding you back? So we're trying to get people to think, we're trying to get people to talk, and we want them to feel. And if there's unfinished business there, that's why they can shut down and feel like, no, I don't want to do this right now. And so sometimes I respect where a person is at, and I let them know, you're always welcome to come back. But if there's something going on there, it's really hard to change the behavior without dealing with some of the background noise. So this is just kind of summarizing what I talked about earlier in terms of the emotional part of things. From the time we're born, food is linked with an emotion because we're comforted with food. And it becomes a strong relationship as we grow up as well. Food is everywhere. It's a quick way to comfort ourselves. It's easy, and we don't have to think much about it because it's everywhere. Certainly in this part of the world. In Canada, food is available 24/7. Increasingly stressful lifestyles, though, we feel like we deserve a break or a treat or reward. And so we want people to be able to see, yeah, you do deserve that treat, but is there a better way of managing it? And some of these resources come from the emotional eating program, Craving Change. So what we try to do is get people to use some different behaviors to better manage those emotions. And so here's just a few examples. So one of the questions from Tammy, is it possible for me to determine if my weight is healthy without ever having to step on the scale again? And I think the answer is yes. Lots of people don't weigh themselves. What they do weigh, though, is how they're feeling, their energy levels, their stress levels, are they better managed, or even how their clothes are fitting, rather than using those numbers. Because when people step on the scale, it actually ends up controlling them. It controls their mood, and it can control their behaviors. So I have a Yay scale, which was designed by Marilyn Wang, and you can actually order this from voluptuaart.com, or you can Google Yay scale, and it will link you in my office instead of a numerical scale. And on the Yay scale, it actually has positive words, because what it's trying to do is redefine what the scale means for a person. And you can see, especially on body positive websites, lots of people have redesigned their scales and even changed their own numbers to say something positive instead. Weight's just a symptom. It's not a disease, and it's a outcome. So we want to try and look at other things. So this is just a diagram and a case study, one of the patients in our office, and I just want to quickly touch here that when we use weight as a measure of success, what ended up happening to this patient, she's a yoga instructor, she's curvy, she's always been curvy, she eats very high quality foods, manages her stress level, but when she came in and saw her BMI was still high, she ended up stopping all those behaviors because she had that why bother attitude. What's the point if I'm still going to be unhealthy? Luckily, she ended up in one of our programs and she got back on track with her behaviors and just needed to be reinforced that what she was doing was right for her. And her body was at the weight that it wanted to be at to be healthy. And she ended up drawing this as sort of her therapy and realizing what was going to work well for her. So here's where some art therapy can be useful. So just finishing up, motivational interviewing, choices and changes. For those of you who are in Ontario, this is a free program offered by Arlene. And they do give out some resources that are actually embedded now into my assessment form, QME. So motivational interviewing can be very, very helpful for people to coach them and sort of not answer the questions for them, but understanding what's going on in the background. So just a few quotes for you from what patients have said. I won't read through them because we want to have some time for questions. These are just some of my recommendations to those of you who asked how can we use this in health promotion, and I think the language is so important. If we can just sharpen the language, what we're using, rather than a negative tone, I think it can be very helpful. If we can use more of a health and all policies approach using our social determinants of health, and of course being holistic. Designing programs that empower people rather than shutting people down, and experimenting, and of course using less prescriptive recommendations, I think are the best way to approach this. So my last few slides are just resources that I find helpful that I've given you links for, as well as some videos, and then pretty much every article that I've ever read is listed in here for you. So I am going to stop there, and there's my contact info if anybody has any other questions.
Thank you, Kori. So it seems like we actually do have a couple of questions. So we're going to try and get through them as quickly as possible. So we're going to start.
Policy. So I think the messaging of public health is so important. I know the negative messaging has worked especially for cigarette smoking or seatbelt use, but I know for sunscreen use, for example, when they used more positive messages like decreasing or keeping young looking skin rather than looking at the negative aspects of cancer and pushing the negative messages, they were more successful at getting people to wear sunscreen when we were talking about healthy, young-looking skin. So my question is, can we in public policy create messages that sort of promote and empower people rather than using negative tactics, which actually can turn around and cause more people to fat shame and body shame and be very negative towards their body image. And especially we know that dieting, there's lots of different ways that people diet. There's over 300,000, I think, diets out there, if not more. People start doing harmful behaviors to try and control their weight. So I know the messaging is really focused on just getting people to be healthier, So I think we just have to define health in public health messages, that health just means more than numbers. So how do you respond to family, friends, or clients who talk about food as good and bad, or about needing to exercise for extrinsic rewards? This can be a tough one because a lot of people, especially I've heard family members say that, oh, well, you're just giving up when you're doing it this way. Again, not everybody is going to connect with this. I think that's okay, but you have to find the right support for yourself if you're being challenged by family and friends. And so that's why it's finding a health at every size coach. I think we all need a coach, and I've heard people refer this to sports teams. What do all sports teams have in common is they have a coach, and they don't always do this on their own. So there is actually a friends and family worksheet that Linda Bacon has on her website that people can give to their family members and say, you know, I know that this might not be the way you do it, but this is the way I need to do it. Will you support me in this? So sometimes, again, it's just how to have that conversation. But sometimes we can't change our family members. So it's just trying to respect that they have their own way of doing it, and we just have to find a different way for ourselves. Because ultimately, I think our family members just want us to be healthy and happy, and they just want to see that we're doing things to help with that. Any comments to, I knew this question was going to come up, reflect the Kramer study that came out of Mount Sinai, that medically benign obesity when following individuals long term. So this was a study that said that there's no such thing as healthy obese person. You kind of have to critically analyze this study because they did not control for a lot of lifestyle behaviors such as smoking or physical activity, nor did they look at how many of these people were actually chronic dieters, because we do know that health risks increase when people are chronic dieters, meaning they've been yo-yoing. So their weight might keep going up and up and up and up, and maybe that's partly why they have higher cardiovascular disease risk, etc. So I think the study was not well controlled in terms of what the factors were that they looked at. So I would question the validity of some of the information coming out of that study and really look at the lifestyle behaviors.
So I think those are all the questions, Kori. So once again, I'd like to especially thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to broaden our perspectives on health and body image. And I'd also like to thank you, all the viewers who took the time to come up and view the webinar. Kori, as you can see, she's included her contact information. So that's her email and her phone number if you guys do have any questions that we weren't able to cover in today's webinar. Also, you can also go on to Kori's website, kornutrition.com, and it's KORnutrition.com. Once again, if you're registered on our mailing list, you will receive the webinar slides and recording. So thank you, Kori. Thank you, everyone, for joining the webinar, and have a fantastic week, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.